The entrance to the bunker was barely visible beneath the moss and collapsed concrete. The metal door twisted outward as if something had pushed from inside rather than forced its way through from above. The early autumn rain had turned the forest floor into a slurry of dark mud, and each step toward the opening released cold fumes rising from the hollow beneath. The air tasted metallic even before I crossed the threshold, a sign that whatever lay underground had been sealed for decades and left to rot. But the moment I descended the first steps, I felt a faint vibration beneath my boots, too steady to be water, too rhythmic to be natural. It was the hum of forced ventilation, smooth and continuous, like a machine on life support, refusing to die. The deeper I went, the more the air changed. Instead of stagnant dampness, the bunker breathed out a flow of surprisingly fresh oxygen, cool and sterile, carrying the faintest trace of detergent, as if the facility were still maintained by unseen staff. The corridor was half flooded, a murky sheet of water swallowing the lower portion of the walls and reflecting the flicker of my flashlight. Rusted pipes snaked overhead, dripping brown streaks into the pool below, but the ceiling fans remained immaculately clean, their blades spinning at an unnaturally precise speed. The steady hum echoed across the water, expanding into a hollow drone that made the bunker feel inhabited despite its decay. It was the kind of sound that suggested routine, the sound of something continuing its shift long after humans had left. I found the locker room by accident, following a dry, elevated walkway that rose above the stagnant water. The metal door was swollen with rust and resisted my push, but once inside I froze. The lockers were pristine, not new, just unnervingly untouched by time, arranged in perfect order along the walls. Each had a small clipboard attached with handwritten dates marking the last recorded visit. Most entries were from the 1980s, some from the early 2000s, but one locker in the far corner carried a crisp, fresh sheet of paper, and on it was today's date. The ink hadn't even finished drying. A thin bead of water ran down the locker's metal surface, not from condensation, but as if something wet had recently brushed against it and stepped away. The walkway continued deeper into the bunker, weaving above the stagnant water like a barely surviving artery. The deeper I moved, the more the ventilation intensified, not louder but colder, as though the air had begun to bypass some filtration system and blow straight from whatever machinery powered this place. The corridor opened into a monitoring chamber, a wide room lined with dead screens and silent consoles, their casings cracked from age. Yet the air vents above them pumped with the same mechanical precision, the same artificial sterility. Dust lay thick on everything except the floor, which showed faint trails where the grime had been disturbed, not by boots but by something dragging, thin, parallel lines etched across the concrete, like fingers pulled through wet sand. On the far wall, a panel of indicator lights flickered. Most were dead, but a cluster in the center pulsed in a slow repeating pattern, as if responding to my presence. I moved closer, wading through ankle-deep water, now creeping onto the walkway. The lights were labeled in a language I didn't recognize. Beneath them, a single switch was snapped in half, jagged plastic edges protruding like broken teeth. The metal around it was warped outward, blackened at the edges, a sign of a short circuit that must have occurred years ago. But the wires beneath the break were freshly exposed, gleaming copper free of oxidation, as if someone or something had recently torn it open. The hum from the ventilation dipped for a moment, almost like a breath being held. At the back of the room was a door I hadn't noticed at first, submerged halfway under the dark water, its window shattered inward. Behind the broken glass, a faint light blinked rhythmically, illuminating shapes that shifted just beyond clarity. As I stepped closer, the water near the threshold rippled against the current of the ventilation stream, reacting not to my movement, but to something pacing on the other side. With each blink of the light, I caught fragments, a shadow suspended at an unnatural height, a slow tilt of something narrow and elongated, the glint of wet metal or bone. Then the blinking stopped. The water stilled, and the ventilation hum returned, louder now, as if the bunker were adjusting itself, preparing. The bunker fell silent the moment I stepped away from the broken door, not gradually, but all at once, like a power cut. The ventilation, which had been the one constant pulse of this place, shut down so abruptly that the air felt too heavy to breathe. In the thick quiet, the distant machinery no longer sounded mechanical. It resembled something alive, shifting deep beneath the concrete. I moved back toward the walkway, but the surface was trembling now, vibrating with a steady rhythm, as if something massive was moving through the flooded levels below. The water beside me rippled in a repeating pattern, the waves too uniform to be natural, as though they were reacting to a signal or command. In the center of the monitoring chamber, the dead screens flickered to life in rapid succession. Their surfaces stayed blank, but the light they emitted was harsh and sterile, illuminating the room in pulses that matched the rippling water. Then the central screen displayed something, not text, but a live feed. It showed the room I was standing in, the same walkway, same consoles, but from a higher angle, as if from a camera mounted near the ceiling. And in the feed, standing behind me, was a figure tall enough to scrape the upper frame of the shot. Its limbs were long and thin, jointed wrong, dripping with bunker water that collected on the floor in slow, heavy taps. But when I turned around, there was nothing. The walkway was empty, the water perfectly still. The screen flickered again, this time showing only static threaded with faint shapes swimming beneath it like silhouettes behind frosted glass. I should have run, but the bunker chose for me. The walkway shuddered violently and then collapsed, swallowed by the rising water, as if the structure had been deliberately unlatched. The water surged cold around my legs, then waist, then chest, dragging me toward the submerged door where the blinking light had vanished. Something brushed past me, not debris, not current, but deliberate. Long fingers or something imitating them, moving with slow, curious precision. The last thing I saw before the water pulled me under was the monitoring screen still glowing above the surface, now showing only one line of text in a language I finally understood, not because it was clear, but because the meaning pressed itself directly into my thoughts. You were not meant to find this place. Then the bunker exhaled, and everything went dark. The first thing that struck me was how wrong the silence felt. Most abandoned mine shafts breathe in subtle ways, drips of condensed water, shifting gravel somewhere deeper inside, faint groans from timber that hasn't collapsed yet. But this tunnel met me with a silence so complete it felt constructed, as if someone had sealed off every natural sound. According to the map, the shaft was barely 200 meters long and partially collapsed, but the entrance looked too clean, too undisturbed for a place that had been left alone for decades. I stepped inside, expecting the typical narrow corridor carved by old drilling equipment. Yet the light from my headlamp died faster than it should have, swallowed by an unusual thickness in the air. For the first 100 meters, everything matched expectations: rusted supports, a floor powdered with undisturbed dust, walls pitted with ancient drill marks. But when my distance meter began jumping unpredictably, 120 meters, then 150, then back to 120, I felt the air shift in a way I couldn't explain. The tunnel should have reached a fork, yet the passage stretched on, perfectly linear, as if someone had carved it much more recently. There were no footprints besides mine, no signs of fresh work, no collapsed rubble cleared from the path. And the strange part wasn't the length itself, but how the tunnel seemed to ignore the map entirely, extending with a confidence that made me question whether I had misread the coordinates or stepped into the wrong entrance. Still, I pressed forward, unsure whether I was driven by curiosity or an unwillingness to admit that something impossible was happening. At the moment the meter hit 300, the beam of my light briefly caught something ahead, a pinpoint glint, the kind produced by glass reflecting another light source. It vanished instantly, but it was enough to freeze me. I turned, expecting the entrance to be faintly visible behind me, but instead saw a small, distant glow, wavering like a weak flashlight held by someone far away. The problem was simple. I was alone, and I didn't remember leaving anything behind. I took a single step backward, and the distance meter spiked again, 360, then 400, then higher, as if the space itself was stretching each time I tried to retreat. The glow at the far end pulsed gently, not approaching, but not weakening either, as if it were waiting for me to move. That was when I realized the tunnel wasn't simply long. It was getting longer. I realized too late that the tunnel was no longer following the map at all. The walls had become rough, uneven, as if the rock itself had been chewed away rather than cut by human tools. My headlamp flickered across grooves that curved like ribs, bending into impossible angles with no trace of drill marks. The air grew warmer, wetter, carrying a thick mineral smell that clung to my throat. Somewhere ahead, beyond the reach of my light, came a slow, rhythmic scraping, something moving, not close, but not far enough to ignore. The sound never echoed. It simply existed, suspended in the heavy air, as though the tunnel was swallowing the reverberations whole. I kept moving because stopping felt worse. The ground beneath my boots softened from packed dust into a dark, gleaming substance, like mud mixed with graphite. Every step left an impression that didn't fully rise back up. I tried to call out to see if my partner was somewhere ahead, but the sound died the moment it left my mouth. Not muted, erased. Even my breathing felt stolen, absorbed into the shifting warmth that pressed from the walls. A narrow junction appeared on the right, one not marked on any blueprint, and carved above it was a shape that resembled an opening eye, stretched and elongated, its center drilled deeper than any of the surrounding rock. For a moment I swore the carving was fresh, the stone around it still dusted with fine powder, as if completed minutes before I arrived. As I leaned closer, the rhythmic scraping stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, thick enough to vibrate in my skull. Then, from deep inside the uncharted passage, the ground trembled once, then twice, like something heavy shifting its weight. My headlamp dimmed a second time, not flickering from low battery, but as if the darkness itself was pushing back against the beam. Instinct screamed that whatever made those sounds was aware of me now, aware in a way that felt personal, intentional. I turned to retreat, but the tunnel behind me looked different, straighter, narrower, as though it had suddenly rearranged itself, guiding me back toward the eye-carved passage. And when the scraping resumed again, far closer this time, I understood that leaving was no longer something I chose. It was something the tunnel allowed. The deeper I moved into the uncharted passage, the more the tunnel seemed to pulse with a slow, organic rhythm, as if the stone itself were breathing. The temperature rose steadily, not with the dry heat of machinery, but with the thick, moist warmth of something alive. My headlamp illuminated surfaces that no longer looked like rock. They glistened with a damp, membranous sheen, curving inward and narrowing until the space allowed only a single direction forward. Behind me, the way I had come was gone entirely, replaced by a smooth, continuous wall that bore no trace of seams or tools. The tunnel had sealed itself, closing like a throat. Panic surged, but there was nowhere to direct it. A faint glow appeared ahead, a dull red shimmer pulsing in slow waves, and with each pulse the floor beneath me trembled gently. I followed it because my mind offered no alternative. The heat intensified until sweat pooled under my collar, and the air tasted metallic, almost electric. When I finally stepped into the chamber, I felt the scale of it before I saw it. The ceiling arched impossibly high, disappearing into darkness, and the walls curved outward like the interior of some vast, ancient cavity. Embedded within them were shaped long, pale structures suspended in the translucent membrane, as if something enormous had grown bones into the stone itself. They weren't human, but disturbingly close, elongated and jointed in ways that suggested movement rather than decay. The red glow came from deep fissures veining the chamber floor, each pulse traveling upward through the walls like a heartbeat. I understood then that the tunnel hadn't been dug, it had been discovered from the inside. Something older than the mine, older than the rock charts, had formed these passages, and was still forming them now. The rhythmic scraping I had heard wasn't an approach, but a continuation, the sound of expansion, of slow, creeping growth. As the chamber trembled again, a fresh line split open along the far wall, widening with a wet, deliberate sound, revealing a new passage growing toward me. The membrane stretched, thinned, and finally tore, releasing a warm gust of air that carried a scent like earth and blood. I stepped back instinctively, but the floor behind me rose, forming a ridge that pressed against my boots, nudging me toward the opening. The realization settled coldly. The tunnel did not want an exit, it wanted a direction. And I was already moving in it,